There are so many great things about being an ESL writing teacher. We have a chance to help each student in developing ideas and organizing them. And one of the most important and challenging jobs we do is to help students improve the grammar in their writing. This does not mean that we just read students' papers and correct the mistakes. That's not going to help students become better writers in the future. And research has found that students don't want teachers to just do that. What we do want to do is to help lead students to discover their mistakes and to become better self-editors. In other words, we want our students to develop the skills they'll need to edit their own papers once they have left our ESL classes and are on their own. I'm going to show you a method with some techniques that you can follow to mark the grammar on your students' papers that will help them become better editors on their own writing. I'll also include a link below which will take you to a handout exercise which you can download for free to use to introduce the technique to your students. Here are some comments that students have said about this method. I like this method because it helps me apply what I learn to the future writing. Another one said, this method makes correcting essays like a puzzle. It's actually fun. And another student wrote, I'm not stressed when I see red marks. I know that's going to be an interesting challenge. Before I illustrate the method, let's look at two commonly used types of approaches ESL teachers take to marking grammar on essays and papers. While looking at these, imagine that you are studying a second language and trying to learn how to improve your grammar in writing. Ask yourself, which of these do you think would help you become a better self-editor? Here are two sentences that a student wrote. I have 3 friends who have helped me a lot. When I have problems, they are always stand me. You probably have noticed several grammar mistakes. Here is probably the least effective way to help the student. In this, the teacher merely corrected the mistakes. After getting this back from the teacher, the student will just copy the sentences correctly without really needing to understand or analyze the mistake. This next method, type 2, is a step better than type 1, but still not the most effective. In this method, the teacher used a code like NF, meaning noun form mistake, and VT, a verb tense mistake, etc. To tell you the truth, for many years I used this type of marking approach. I was under the illusion that, for example, by marking NF above the word friend, that I was helping students notice that after the word 3 they need a plural noun. I thought that they would then become aware that they were making noun form mistakes and that they needed to be aware of this in future writing. However, I was deluding myself regarding the effectiveness of this method. To revise this, the student doesn't need to apply editing skills since the teacher had directly indicated what needed to be changed. When the student corrects this, we don't know if he had made the mistake because he hadn't proofread it carefully, or if he has a lack of grammar knowledge. When I talked to students about their corrections, many of them hadn't even really thought about the codes. They just noticed that there was a red mark above the word and that they needed to change something. They didn't apply these codes to their future papers. In other words, I might as well have just put an X above the mistakes like this. As you can see, with those methods, students have missed the opportunity to discover their mistakes. In other words, they weren't given a chance to find their mistakes on their own. Needless to say, we can't just tell students that we noticed that they have some grammar mistakes in their papers and that they should try to correct them. Instead, there is a method that we can use in which we lead them to discover their mistakes without us directly telling them what their mistake is. And as the students whom I had quoted above said, this process is like a puzzle for students. And over again, they have told me that it's actually kind of fun finding their mistakes. Basically, we are giving students hints about where their mistakes are and what kind of mistake it is. Then they use the hints to find the mistakes. You can see in that margin, I've put in some hints using some codes. For example, I use NF for noun form mistakes and VT for verb tense errors. There's nothing special about my codes. You can use any codes that are most comfortable for you and your students. In this example paragraph, in the margin next to the first line of the text, you can see the two codes NF and VT. This means that somewhere in the first line, the student had made two mistakes. And to give the student more clues, I've indicated that he needs to look at his verbs and his nouns. Similarly, in the second line, I've indicated that there are three mistakes. He needs to add a comma somewhere, he needs to take out a word, and he needs to add a preposition somewhere. By putting these codes or hints in the margin, the teacher has given the students a chance to find the errors on their own. After marking the whole paper this way, we return the papers to the students. On their own, they use the codes to find and correct their mistakes, and then they show their corrections to the teacher. As with any new technique, though, an introductory exercise is vital. In the notes below is a link to an introductory exercise that I use with my students. This link will also include more information about using hints to lead students to discover their grammar errors in their papers. Here is something very important that we can learn about students' grammar knowledge from this process. If the student is able to do this, we can feel quite confident that the mistakes that he had made were caused by some poor editing or poor proofreading rather than a lack of grammar knowledge. But let's say the student tells you that he can't find the verb tense mistakes in the first line. This should be a good indication that he is lacking in understanding about verb tenses. In that case, we might want to give him some extra practice with verb tenses, especially if we notice that there are a lot of VT codes in the margins of the paper. Now, some of you are probably wondering, but what if students can't find the mistakes? Or what if they correct something incorrectly? Good question. The answer is connected to one of the absolute most enjoyable aspects of teaching writing to ESL students. It's called conferencing. During conferencing, you get to talk to each individual student. They show you their corrections and ask you for extra hints for mistakes that they couldn't find. That is how I found out that the student who had written the paragraph about his three friends had problems finding his verb tense mistakes. In that particular case, to help him find the mistake, I started by asking him to underline the verbs in the first sentence. Now, I think I can hear some of you say, "Hey David, where am I going to find time to conference individually with students? And even if I had the time, where am I going to find a place? I don't have my own office." Those are very legitimate concerns, and I have the perfect solution. It's called the Writing Workshop Approach to Writing Classes. In my next video, I'll discuss how to organize a workshop. In brief, during class, while students are individually doing productive writing activities and exercises, the teacher can conference individually with students. In other words, you don't have to spend any time outside of class conferencing. I've shared this approach with many instructors, some of whom were more traditionalists and were quite skeptical at first. But even the most reluctant to change their approach adapted the workshop approach after trying it out. To conclude this video about leading students through hints, several years ago, I changed from directly indicating the mistakes above the words to give hints, and I changed it to giving hints in the margin. I showed this approach to many of my colleagues who had started using it. Since then, we've noticed a great improvement in students' ability to self-edit. And as a result, we found students making a lot fewer foolish grammar mistakes on their essays. Also, we found students' interest in using the hints to correct their mistakes increased. It's often amusing to see their reaction when they ask for an additional hint, and after getting some from the teacher, then realize that they could have found it on their own. Oh no, what a foolish mistake. I should have found that. It's almost as if they feel like they missed a chance to score points in a game. Finally, I should mention that many of us teachers have used the codes in the margin technique successfully with students from high beginners to advanced levels. My next video will be about the workshop approach to a writing class, which will give you time during class to conference with each of your students. In the meantime, I'll include links below where you can read about these topics on my blog. I'll also continue to add more videos about teaching ESL conversation, writing, reading, and grammar to my channel. This channel here, Student-Centered Teaching ESL by David Kehe. Feel free to subscribe. See you next time.